What's up, Green Bay Packers fans? Welcome back. As always, thank you for joining me. My name's Paul Brettel. Today we're going to discuss the Green Bay Packers and trades. I know, two things that do not go together, but we're going to talk about it. But first, before we do that, you know what to do. Hit like on the video, hit subscribe on the YouTube channel. I do greatly appreciate it. Follow me on Twitter at Paul_Brettel. Find all my work over at ESPNLacrosse.com, including the article version of what we're discussing here today. And my Wisconsin sports radio fans, Packers, Brewers, Bucks, Badgers, whatever you need, download the 105.5 ESPN Lacrosse app. So like I said, Packers and trades, we know those are two things that do not go together, but as I'm sure you can guess, this conversation is sparked. The article that I wrote over at ESPNLacrosse.com has been sparked by the Myles Garrett, Cleveland Browns pass rusher, demanding a trade. And of course, on paper, Myles Garrett, Packers have a huge need on the defensive line, a more consistent pass rush. They're a team that feels like they're on the cusp of competing for a Super Bowl. On paper, all of that makes absolute sense. And I'm not here today to talk about whether it makes sense, whether it doesn't make sense, what would a trade package look like. That's not what we're here to do. Now, I will say I would consider it unlikely given the Packers' history under Gutekunst and as an organization as a whole when it comes to making really, really big trades. But the purpose of the video today is Brian Gutekunst, during his season-ending press conference, was asked, and not about Myles Garrett, not about any player in particular, but was asked about his thoughts on giving up premium draft capital for, again, a high-end player in return. In short, and we'll get to this, Brian Gutekunst said, well, you better be right about it. But what I wanted to talk about are the other factors in play. What else goes into that decision-making process? So as, rumors, reports heat up with Myles Garrett, whether or not other players become available at any point during this offseason, I wanted to take you through some of the things that are part of that decision-making process for the Green Bay Packers. Now let's start here. During that same season-ending press conference, Brian Gutekunst said, "It's time to compete for championships again." And that statement was preceded by him talking about the great group of guys that they have in the locker room, all the talent that's on the roster, but also the need for a greater sense of urgency from this Packers team. These opportunities when you're in the playoffs, just because you're there 1 year in the NFL doesn't guarantee that you're going to come back. Now, obviously, are there instances where it's probably likely you're going to make it back? Sure. But when you have that opportunity, when you make it to the playoffs, you have the opportunity to get hot and go on a run, you got to do everything you can to capitalize on it. And so I think what Gutekunst wants is a greater sense of urgency in those moments, right? Realizing that these opportunities aren't guaranteed. They can be finite in the NFL. So when you have them, do everything you can to maximize what's in front of you. Now, when it comes to that sense of urgency, maximizing that, taking advantage of it in those situations, that's going to fall on the players and the coaches ultimately, right? That's going to be up to them to make sure that they're doing everything in their preparation throughout the week, game planning practices, all of that, to make sure that when kickoff is on Sunday, they're in the best position possible, again, to capitalize on whatever opportunity is out in front of them. But for Brian Gutekunst, what does that entail, right? If it's time to compete for championships again, what does that entail on his end? Does it include going off script and making a big trade, which not just Gutekunst, but the Packers organization in general, it's not in their DNA. Now let's start with free agency. Not every offseason are we going to see the Packers going out and making a splashy, high-profile addition to the team, but it is something that we have seen from Green Bay under Gutekunst. I mean, just a year ago, right? Josh Jacobs, Xavier McKinney. We can look at some previous offseasons with Zadarius Smith and Preston Smith as a couple other examples. If the right player is there at a position in need, the Gutekunst will hand out top of market value or close to it to bring in that right player that he feels can really help this Packers team go to the next level. And again, there's a process that they go through to get to that point. And a few videos back, we dove deeper into that and Brian Gutekunst's comments around that. He also said that players like Josh Jacobs, Xavier McKinney, in this instance, we're talking about trades, Myles Garrett, those aren't players that are going to be available very often, right? This is pretty unheard of in regards to Myles Garrett's case. But there's other factors that go into that, right? It's not just, oh, we have a need, here's the best player at that need. It's the cap space, it's the locker room fit. There's a lot of other factors in play, as we all know. Now, while Gutekunst has shown that willingness to do that with free agents, not with trades, right? That's not something that we've seen. As I said, that's not in his DNA. It's not in the Packers' DNA when it comes to roster building, their philosophy around how to construct their roster, not just for the current year. Because again, the general manager's job, of course, is to put together the best team for the current year, but he also has to have his eyes 2-3 years down the road. And when it comes to these trades, for lack of a better term, we'll say Gutekunst has been more cautious in that regard, because while the outside world may be focused on who can you bring in, right? And as we said at the top of this, makes all sense in the world to add Myles Garrett to the Packers roster, but there's probably about 31 other teams who could justify and say that as well, because of the caliber of player he is, the position that he plays, all of that. But the reality is you're giving up something, and it's not just the first round draft pick or the 2 first round draft picks, whatever it might be. There's more to it that the team is parting with. And again, that's the other part of this equation. It's not just who's coming in, but what's going out. What are you giving up in that process? Because along with sending away a first round pick, you're now lost the ability to use that selection. So now you're missing out on a young, ascending, high-end player who comes with an inexpensive rookie contract. And in today's salary cap league, that's how you have to build your roster. You need a good number of players on their rookie deals who can come in and make a high impact right away, who can give you production, who can give you valuable snaps, while again, relatively speaking, compared to players in year 5 and 8 and 10 and who are hitting free agency compared to what they're earning on the open market is relatively less. So you need those players on your roster to help you build out a complete team. And again, when you are sending away a first round pick or multiple early round picks, you're now losing that ability to construct your roster in that fashion in the coming years. So how does that impact you down the road, right? Because now you're also taking in, if you're acquiring a high caliber player, there's a high caliber contract coming with that. There's a big cap hit coming with that. So what's the trickle down effect from a roster construction standpoint down the road? Does that limit you differently in free agency in 2026 and 2027? What about with your own young players who are coming towards the end of their rookie deals and are looking for new contracts? Do you have the ability to retain all those players? So there's just a massive trickle-down effect that comes with, again, giving up that draft capital, but also the salary cap impact of that, right? Losing out on the inexpensive rookie deal, taking on a much larger salary cap hit, and then what does that mean for the future years from a roster construction standpoint? Like I said, or as Gutekunst said, but we said at the start of all this, he said, you better be right on this, because if you're giving up all of that to bring in a player that you feel can be a difference maker, and that's when you're making these kinds of moves, right? This is a difference maker. We are so close, but if we get this player, they can put us over the top. They can be what separates us from where we were to where we want to go and put us among the championship contenders. You need that trade, that player you're acquiring to do that for you, because again, you're giving up so much. It's not just, Packers don't have the 23rd overall pick this year. They still got 6-7 other selections to make. It's the cap space. It's the inexpensive contract. It's the trickle-down effect of now having that on your salary cap book for the next several years. So again, those are just some of the other factors in play. And while Gutekunst laid all that out during his season-ending press conference, he also said, look, if it's for the right player, we're going to consider it. We're going to look into it. And again, this wasn't a specific conversation to Myles Garrett or any player. He's just generally speaking. So those are just some of the other factors that are going to be a part of this decision-making process outside of, hey, we need a pass rusher. He's a really good pass rusher. Let's go get him. Now, as I just wrapped up saying, caveat to all that is you're obviously going to be more willing to make those quote-unquote sacrifices, the cap, draft capital, the cap space, all that for the right player. And one would assume that Myles Garrett absolutely fits the right player category in this conversation. I mean, 4-time All-Pro, 2023 Defensive Player of the Year. just turned 29 years old at a position where you still see players in their mid 30s making a really high impact as a pass rusher. So still plenty of what should be highly productive years ahead of Myles Garrett. And he finished last season as well, again, after being the Defensive Player of the Year in 2023, finishes top 3 in pressures during the 2024 season. So again, he's absolutely the right player. And if there's someone that the Packers should be calling on to at the bare minimum, hey, check in, it's Myles Garrett, right? I don't think anyone's going to argue that aspect of it. Now, as far as what would it take to acquire Myles Garrett, I think we start here with the reports are saying right now that the Browns still are not willing to trade Myles Garrett at this time. Now, of course, that can all change. It can change rather quickly, but that's the report that's out there. And of course, to make any trade happen, you need two teams to be working together to do so. As far as the compensation, if it gets to that point where the Browns are willing to trade Myles Garrett, there's a wide-ranging, speculation out there around what that could be. Adam Schefter threw out the Khalil Mack trade when the Raiders sent him from the Raiders to the Bears. And in that trade, the Raiders got back 2 firsts, a third, and a 6th-round pick. The Bears got Khalil Mack, a 2nd, and a conditional 5th. Diana Rossini, NFL insider for The Athletic, she had one general manager who she was talking with say Myles Garrett will get 1+, so a 1st-rounder and then some more on top of that. But he said there's not going to be 3 first-rounds traded for Myles Garrett. That GM said that's not going to happen. Jordan Schultz, NFL insider for Fox, he said another GM texted him 2 firsts. So again, we're getting a wide range of what a team may have to give up for Myles Garrett. But in addition, again, to shipping away whatever that draft capital ends up being, there's a salary cap component to this. And right now, Myles Garrett's cap hit in 2025 is $19.77 million. It's $20.37 million in 2026. And most likely that's going to end up being irrelevant because I'm going to guess whatever team acquires him, if it gets to that point, they're going to give Myles Garrett a new contract. And it's going to be top of market or incredibly close to it. And right now, in terms of average annual value, that top of market figure is Nick Bosa of the 49ers, who's earning $34 million per year. So again, like we just laid out, that's the other part of this equation for whoever acquires Myles Garrett. Now, from the Packers' perspective, salary cap wise, according to Over the Cap, Packers have $42.14 million in available cap space this offseason. That ranks 14th most among the rest of the NFL. And during Gutekunst's press conference after the season, he talked about how he likes where they're at cap-wise. He feels that they're in a really good spot, and they've finally started to break free from those restructure-heavy off-seasons that they had during 2021, 2022. Obviously, there was the dead cap hit that they had to absorb last season from trading Aaron Rodgers, but that restructure-heavy approach, again, the benefit is in the short term, you get cap relief, right? You're taking salary cap charges from the current year and you're pushing them into future years. But in those future years, the cap hit of those players has now risen, right? Because those cap charges have to hit the book at some point. So when you're moving them from the current year to future years, there's cap relief now, but you're taking on extra salary cap impact in the future. It's like using a credit card, right? You're kicking that can down the road. The Packers have finally gotten out from, again, a lot of those restructures that they did during the 2021, 2022 off seasons to try to keep that core, more veteran-heavy roster with expensive contracts together. So again, Gutekunst feels good about where they're at currently cap-wise. And in a perfect world, he would like to maintain the flexibility that they have. But again, and this is what this all goes back to, our free agency conversation, the trade conversation, the salary cap conversation here. For the right player, right, you're willing to make those quote-unquote sacrifices from a cap perspective in terms of, all right, we don't have enough cap space right now. We got to make more room. Let's restructure these deals. Let's push the salary cap can down the road so we have the room now to bring this player on board who can help us make that Super Bowl push. Again, all factors in play, but that's another element to this, right? We talked about giving up the draft capital. We talked about losing out on, a young ascending player on an inexpensive deal. We talked about having to offer the new player a new contract and take on that additional cap hit. And now, potentially, in order to do that, to make that salary cap room, you're now restructuring deals. So you're taking current contracts of players, again, taking a chunk of those cap charges from this year, pushing them to future years. You got flexibility now, you lose flexibility in the future. So that's just another element to this conversation that goes into the decision-making process. It's never just, all right, give up a first and a third, whatever it might end up being, 2 firsts, whoever, whatever. It's never just about that, right? There's this trickle-down effect that's also a big factor in these decisions. And again, if Myles Garrett does become available, if the Cleveland Browns are willing to trade him, which again, they reportedly are not right now, and of note, if the Browns do trade Myles Garrett, they take on $36 million in dead cap hit this year. So $36 million of their 2025 cap space is going to go to Myles Garrett's contract, even if he's playing somewhere else. So again, it's another factor in here. But having said all that, again, my hope with this was to just illustrate some of the other factors and a bit of the thought process. And again, Brian Gutekunst only gave us a very small preview of what all goes into these conversations. So the overarching point here is there's a lot more in play than just a first rounder, giving that up to get a player in return, right? A lot of other factors that go into this decision-making process, but also that doesn't ultimately mean that a move can't be made or won't be made either. And again, I want to make sure we're clear here. Brian Gutekunst was not talking about Myles Garrett. This conversation Gutekunst had was weeks ago before Myles Garrett even requested to be traded from the Browns on Monday. But generally speaking, those are the other factors that are a part of the equation for the Packers in making these decisions, deciding if they want to go down that path or not. And again, that isn't to say that it can't happen, that it won't happen. Brian Gutekunst continued to preface everything with, if it's for the right player, you're willing to make those sacrifices, those adjustments, all of those things. But those other factors certainly weigh heavily on the decision. So there you have it, my friends. As always, I appreciate you tuning in. And you know what? If you've come this far, if you made it to this point in the video, you might as well hit like, you might as well hit subscribe. I greatly appreciate it. Follow me on Twitter at Paul_Brettel. Find all my work over at ESPNlacrosse.com and download the 1055 ESPN Lacrosse app. Till next time, friends, take care.